To the Red Bull LAN Orlando, where I'm here with Liquid Sheth. Sheth, you just got the chance to play 5 games against one of the things that you described as one of your big weaknesses, one of your big struggles. How was the experience for you overall?
Overall, that's kind of tricky. It was a lot of games, so I guess to sum it up, there were a few pretty solid things I found that I was doing wrong. Pretty solid things that each individual person told me that helped a little bit, which is pretty sweet. And then there was, I don't know, it was really good overall. I guess that's the easy way to put it.
Well, I want to ask about your first series against Puma, or JYP, who I will continue to call Puma throughout the event.
Fair enough.
JYP is an experienced player when it comes to doing the air openings. He generally does it by choice in tournaments. And in those games, I saw JYP giving you feedback in both set number 1 and 2. Tell us a little bit about what those first 2 games were like.
Okay, game 1, I think I probably made too many spores, didn't deal with Phoenix quite as well as I could have, for sure, obviously. And then because of that, it just put me behind. But he offered the suggestion to make 5 Hydras only to deal with that, and only just to take extra expansions. Like, the goal isn't really to push with those 5 Hydras ever, it's just to take an expansion. And I hadn't really realized that they would make 5 to defend. I realized made 5 to attack and be safe attacking, but for some reason I never thought of it to purely defend, to expand really quick everywhere. Yeah,
it's interesting because I mean, we even saw you taking those expansions faster and faster. You always built that 4th macro hatch in your main, but then that 5th hatch down in the bottom right of Daybreak especially was popping up a lot more and more. And then you got the chance to play against Hasuabs again on Daybreak. At this point, I just want to ask, I know Daybreak was your favorite map.
Yeah.
Specifically for this challenge, was there a reason you kept choosing it other than that?
It's a map where every other build that Protoss does is good there, but I'm really comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But this one starport opening, I'm not comfortable with it on that map because it leads to that late game like that so nicely for Protoss. And for me, planning on going into MLG, I guess I probably shouldn't say it, but it's probably going to be one of the maps I pick a lot as my pick.
Yeah.
So I wanted it down path.
And so you're on game 3 against Hasuabs. Obviously against Puma, one of the biggest struggles we saw was that JYP. Oh my God, I really am going to do that. That's terrible. You're playing against that EG Protoss that's really good. And the huge struggle that we saw was that it didn't seem like you could get effectively to the Broodlords, that there was that problem with the timing pushes, and then, of course, with the opening we saw in game number 2 on Cloud Kingdom. But then game 3 comes along versus Hasuabs, and you managed to get the composition up that you liked. But how did you feel once you got to that moment in gameplay?
Once I got to that moment, I was really happy because I'm like, okay, I got what I wanted. This is where I want to be. But then he kind of avoided me continuously. And then when he went for the counter, I didn't have enough defense. And I didn't have anything really back there. And I didn't really know what to do with my Broodlords, to come back. I just couldn't make up my mind quick enough, and I didn't choose the right thing there.
Well, if you could go back, or I guess I should say, if you're in that same position again, how do you think you'd adjust with your Broodlords?
I think with the Broodlords, I need to be a bit more defensive until I've gotten enough spines and enough larva kind of banked for me to move out, be safe, and have a good rally that won't have to be dealing with other things.
Yeah.
That it can just help keep pushing the Broodlords. And then also, the Broodlords should really go towards the main, I think. And then I can just use the rally to go up and deal with that. Or just, it helps keep the army in one of 2 places, and I can see it easier if I'm pushing the main, because he has to choose then what he wants to do. And hopefully I'll have the spines enough back home that if he just runs all the way around, I'll just base race fully instead of the way I did it.
And I mean, I even heard you say before we got the chance to start this interview that you were thinking a lot more about creep as you got to the later games in the practice session. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, I don't really spread creep too, like, it's not my priority in ZVP as much as it is in ZVT. ZVT, it's a huge deal. In ZVP, I always figured it's nice to have a little bit extra, but they're always going to kill it. They always have an observer, and they'll just zip with Colossus, and it goes away really quick. So it wasn't primarily, what I wanted to do. But in order to do this style, I think you need to have it spread out further so you can kind of spine up in the proper angle you want.
Yeah.
And you need to, like, cut specific places that, okay, if you engage here, I can cut around it. And if you don't get that positioning, it's really tough.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that a lot in, especially games 4 and 5, where you started to build spines, but then you had to build 10 or 20 extra spines because the creep was sort of back and trying to cover all the chokes. So since the 5th game was the game that's most fresh in everyone's mind, I want to talk about that in a little more detail. The game started out, and it was the same opening that Puma did and JYP did in game number 2. And in that, I know, right? It was that same opening that JYP did in game number 2 that caused the loss, but you did a very nice defense. Were you feeling flustered at all? I mean, I know that even though it's a training situation, there was still 4 losses in a row.
Yeah, I figured, I kept tell myself each time, it's how I'm learning. It's how I'm learning, and that's what's important here, right? We'll have a little mini tournament at the end, and then there's Columbus, and this is all learning. So even though with that, it was kind of annoying to lose every game, obviously. So here, when you did that, I thought, well, that's 5-0, and at least I'll come out here and I'll say I learned something. And even now, I learned something, so that's what's important.
And so you're in that moment where you were defending against this huge push. You made a bunch of roaches. Right before the game started, in chat, you were talking about building that infestation pit a lot earlier. And it looked like you built it as quickly as you could afterwards, but what was sort of going through your head at that point in time about how to adjust your plan?
Well, I figured he was going to kill the 3rd, so then I was just going to be in trouble and just have to do whatever. But after that, once I realized that, well, let's just go to Infester. I've made these roaches. I don't need to make any more, really, because we defended, and then just see where I go from there.
So at this point in time, you were able to start taking your 5th base. You had the spines up, and it was still kind of an uphill battle from that point in time, especially after Sase was doing those weird immortal drops all over the place. If you got to that hive stage again, you got the spines up, how do you feel about how you'd maybe adjust for things like Warp Prism Harass or counterattacks, or even some of the Zergling counterattacks you were doing as well?
For that, I definitely think it's really important to have a spine spore in the main, and I didn't have that at all for any of the games, and that was just stupid, right? Just bad play. So put even a spore in the 5th, spore in the 4th. I think one game, I don't know if it was here, but maybe in practice earlier, where I just lost the DTs. So it's really important just to have a spore everywhere.
Yeah.
And I had the money to do it for sure, so might as well.
So at this point in time, what do you feel like is the next step in terms of training and practicing for that specific situation you were training in your challenge?
Taking these things that I spent a lot of time thinking here in between these matches and during these matches and talking with them and just playing it a lot, like just mass gaming with that style and getting the build orders kind of mentally ingrained now that I figured out what I want to do.
Awesome. Well, dude, Sheth, thank you so much. Congrats on that huge learning experience that you just finished in your challenge. For now, we're going to be stepping to a brief break, but when we come back, it's time for Thorzane to be training his Terran vs. Zerg aggression, so don't go anywhere. I'm Day 9, and this is the Red Bull Orlando, day number 1.